Hey everybody, welcome to a first look at the Baldur's Gate 3 early access character customization. We're going to be going through the options and showing everybody what we have available right now. Joining me is Tyler or Mel, and we're going to be taking a look through each of these options that we get to customize since its release.
Yeah, we're super excited, especially because we're big D&D fans, so we're hoping to give a bit of a description of how we think it's going to go into the game.
Right. We haven't beaten the game yet, and so we don't know what certain decisions may influence later on, like dialogue options and the like, but we have a general understanding of each of these decisions' purposes.
And we've played a couple hours into the game.
Right.
So we do have a general understanding of what stats equal what.
Exactly. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and take a look. In Origin, we have the first option here, which is just a male or female or masculine or feminine appearance.
Yep, and then you can't actually choose the set characters yet. You have to go with a custom character.
Correct. So these are not available in early access. Nothing happens if you click on them. So there's no like preview or anything. Currently, right now, you can just go with the custom Origin,
right,
which has this description.
And then that basically, you can obviously name your character whatever you want. But then that kind of leads us into backgrounds. Now, backgrounds in Dungeons and Dragons and similar games like this generally hold more of a purpose than just a fun little background. For example, each background, as you can see, generally provides you with two abilities.
Or proficiencies.
Or yeah, proficiencies is what they're called in D&D. That your character can use in the open world to kind of avoid obstacles, have different dialogue options and stuff like that. And they also help you with like ability checks and stuff like that when you have to roll a dice to see if you pass certain parameters.
Right. So the effect is that it adds your proficiency bonus, which is a universal bonus that you get towards things that you're proficient with, which we'll get into later once we see that stat in one of the later categories. But essentially, the things that your character knows how to use gets this bonus for its rolls.
Cool.
So we can take a look at some of the backgrounds here. We've got the Acolyte, which is sort of like somebody that spends time at a temple. And like it could be something like, a priest could be an Acolyte, or it could be like, even some like mage classes.
Yeah.
Can go with Acolyte.
Yeah, it's also worth that these background proficiencies that you get are also tied to a skill. So if you're looking at like what we have the Charlatan right now, we have Deception and Sleight of Hand. Right. Deception is going to be focused around your Charisma skill, which on our current character is set at 12. You can change that later. Mm-hmm. And Sleight of Hand is a dexterity based. So it might be good to select a background that kind of plays into the strengths of your character.
Right. And you could always come back and change these after you've selected other options further along in the list.
Right.
So we've got Charlatan, who's, the name is self-descriptive for
kind
that.
Kind of a con man.
Yeah. And then we've got Criminal, who has Deception and Stealth proficiencies. We have Entertainer, who has Acrobatics and Performance proficiencies. Folk Hero with Animal Handling and Survival. Guild Artisan with Insight and Persuasion. Noble with History and Persuasion. Hermit with Medicine and Religion. Outlander with Athletics and Survival. Sage with Arcana and History. Sailor with Athletics and Perception. Soldier with Athletics and Intimidation. Urchin with Sleight of Hand and Stealth. And then we're back to Acolyte.
Yep. And then that's probably everything for Origin. We could probably move on to Race now.
Right. Oh, I actually didn't notice. So all of this right here is just currently what your pre-built, automatically generated character has. These are all going to be customized later. So like these proficiencies, two of them. So for instance, from Acolyte, you'll see Insight and Religion have popped up on there just because that's the background that it's at right now. But they'll change every time you change this.
Yep.
So now we'll be moving on to Race. So for Dungeons and Dragons, Race isn't just like the appearance that you have. It actually has
stat effects.
Right. So for instance, this Elf class has sub-races, which are sort of just what type of elf you are. So there's High Elf, there's Wood Elf.
And that's it for now.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
There's also Drow, which is technically a sub-race of elf, but in this game they've actually separated it into its own thing.
Right.
But we'll get to that later. For now, we have High Elf, which...
they're more magically inclined.
Yes.
So as you can see below, there's a dexterity of +2, which is going to be like your daggers and your short swords and stuff like that. And then more importantly for like the wizard that we currently have set up, it gives you intelligence bonus. So you can technically have any race with any like class that you want. It just kind of makes more sense to make some races certain classes based on their bonuses. Like if I was creating a fighter that's going to be a strength build, I'm not necessarily going to need intelligence or dexterity as much as what the elf implies.
Right. And it's not like the game is unplayable if you play an elf with a strength build, but
for sure,
it can help with certain edge cases.
Yeah.
But from the top, we have Keen Senses, which automatically gives us proficiency in perception. Fey Ancestry, which gives advantage on saving throws against being charmed. And magic cannot put you to sleep. So what that means is there is a charm spell that can be placed on you, and when that happens, you have to roll a die, and you have to beat a certain number in order to keep yourself from being put under this charm spell. And when you do that, you have advantage, which means you roll 2 dice.
And you take the higher one.
Exactly. And so that's beneficial for those specific cases. Proficiency with these 4 weapons. Normally, proficiencies come from your class. And so when a race has proficiencies, that's just added onto it just in case the class doesn't come with it.
Right.
For instance, with a wizard class, you do not get proficiency with these 4 weapons. And so this lets you be proficient with that and add your proficiency bonus to your attacks with it.
Right, which your proficiency bonus is calculated off of your ability scores.
Right.
But we'll get to that once we go down the skills path.
And this this race also has dark vision, which a lot of the non-human races do, which allows you to see in the dark up to 12 meters. And here's the speed, 9 meters for a high elf, and then we have an intelligence +1. So these 2 are under the sub-race traits. The base racial speed is a stat that every race has. It just can change based on the sub-race. But the intelligence +1 is specifically from the high elf.
Right.
And also with the high elf, you get this cantrip. So a cantrip in Dungeons and Dragons is a spell that doesn't cost anything to use.
You can use it every turn.
Yes. And so here we have the basic one, Minor Illusion, that just was the automatically chosen one. You can hit Customize and then choose from any on this list that you want to use. And so there's a lot of options here. We're not going to go through them right now. You can look those up individually if you'd like. But as long as you pick the one you want, that's just the one that your character starts with.
Yep.
So we're going to stick with Minor Illusion. And we'll move on to the Wood Elf.
Which is almost identical. You basically just get the extra Mask of the Wild at the bottom, and instead of intelligence, you get wisdom.
Right, and they also move faster, actually.
Yes.
Their walking speed is increased to 10.5, which, by the way that this game is played is sort of a turn-based combat situation, and your movement speed is actually how much of a distance you can cover in one turn. And it doesn't take like actions or anything to move. Instead, you have the ability to move no matter what on your turn, unless some other effect kept you from moving. And so it's good to just have a very good amount of movement speed, because you can, like, especially with a wizard, stay out of combat and keep moving away while attacking.
For sure, for sure.
And then we have this Mask of the Wild, which allows the character to have proficiency in stealth automatically, which is very good. And then we have the Wisdom +1.
Yep.
Other than that, these are the same because it is still an elf. They do not get a cantrip for the Wood Elf.
Right.
That is something that is exclusive to the High Elf. They also have a greener/yellower skin tone.
Yeah, but that doesn't particularly matter, because under appearance you can change all that.
Right. So just a quick peek at appearance, you can change the skin color to, like, basically whatever you want.
Right. There are certain shades that are exclusive to certain things. So, for example, you see the palette for the Wood Elf. If you go back to High Elf, you'll notice that instead of the yellowish color, it changes it to like a Moon Elf style for the purple. So there are some different things that you can kind of look at, but it's very few and far between when it comes to the changes for appearance.
Right.
But now we can just kind of click through the races really quick. We won't break down each one like super into detail, but mostly point out the differences.
Right.
So Tiefling are going to be really good, like bards, if they were in this game, which they're not currently, or for this game, it would be Warlock, which is the charisma main character of this game. They don't have as many bonuses as the elf. Most of their bonuses come through like the different cantrips and stuff that they get, and they also get resistances to like fire and stuff like that based on what kind of Tiefling you are.
Well, I don't think they get to pick a cantrip with any of their subclasses, but they do start with a thaumaturgy cantrip, and then they have, was it not this subclass? Which is the, maybe it's just specifically because it doesn't start with it, but the Tiefling has the Hellish Rebuke.
You get that at a higher level.
Right, but it's not showing here, which is weird. Because this is the race, this isn't the class.
That's
so
true.
It should show from the beginning. But
yeah.
One thing that it's not showing that you do or should get if it's not... Actually, did they take it out in this?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We haven't made it that far to find out.
So typically Tieflings have an ability to cast a spell called Hellish Rebuke for free once a day after they've reached a certain level. And it doesn't seem like these Tieflings get that ability, but that may be something that gets added later,
right.
Or is something that they level into. But let's take a look at the different sub-races and their effects. So we have the Asmodeus?
Yeah, Asmodeus.
And this one has 9 meters of movement and bonuses to intelligence and charisma. And as a base, the Tieflings have resistance to fire damage, which means you only take half, rounded down from whatever damage you should have taken. And they have dark vision, of course, and this cantrip for thaumaturgy, which you can see the description now, gets you advantage on intimidation and performance checks. And then if we move over to the, I'm going to mispronounce these really bad, Mephistopheles Tiefling, it instead gets intelligence +1 and charisma +2, which I believe...
That's the same.
Oh, okay.
Yep. It's basically you start with a different cantrip, and I'm assuming for dialogue options, depending on who you're talking to in the future, your background of where you descended from is a factor.
Right. And,
so it's more of a fluff thing.
Yeah. And so we have the Mage Hand cantrip here instead, which, yeah, you might go over that later. But for now, instead, we've got a Strength +1 for the Zariel Tiefling, and then also the Thaumaturgy. Same as the first one. And so that's the Tiefling for you. Real quick, that's the male Tiefling. I know we didn't really switch between those two, but it also has a male-female option here.
Yep.
Moving on to the Drow.
Drows are technically still elves. I'm not 100% sure why they didn't just make it a subclass of elf. I do know that they get a cantrip like the high elf. I just don't think they have any of like the sub things like the wisdom or the mask or anything like that.
What's funny is I believe the half-elf, a Drow half-elf is part of that option, so it's a little odd.
Well, they also get different race features as a whole, which might be why they broke it down.
Just a ease of programming, I'm guessing. But
yeah, you get charisma instead of wisdom or intelligence, and you also get proficiency with hand crossbows and better dark vision.
Oh yeah, look at that, 24 meters.
Yeah.
And they start with the dancing lights, which increases your ability to see even more.
Right, or your party members that don't have dark vision.
Drow canonically live in very dark places like caves or just like
the Underdark is what it's called.
Which is like an entire network of villages and cities that all exist underground.
Yeah.
But that's the reason that their abilities are so focused on being able to see and operate in the dark.
Right.
Racial speed is 9 meters. Their Fey ancestry, just like the rest of the elves. Dexterity and charisma boosts, and proficiency with these weapons. And then we got the Seldarine Drow, which I believe all of these are actually the same. They don't have sub-race features.
Right. It's basically just backgrounds for which part of the Underdark you come from.
Oh, it's just these two, I suppose.
Yep.
And they're not much different other than the descriptions, I suppose. But disregarding that, we can move on to humans now, which are the simplest of the races just because...
They're basically a jack of all trades.
Right.
Like, you can make them good at just about anything, but they don't have anything super spectacular.
Right. They get +1 to all 6 of their ability scores, and they have a base racial speed of 9 meters, and that's it.
Yep.
All right, then we've got the Githyanki.
Yep.
I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. And they also do not have any sub races, so we could just take a look at this base one. We have intelligence +1 and strength +2 and a base racial speed of 9 meters. Then we have armor proficiency, which there's 3 tiers of armor, or I suppose 4 if you count clothing.
Right.
So you have clothing, light armor, medium armor, and heavy armor. Heavy armor being the best base amount of armor that it gives you.
Right. Well, there's a weird trade-off with armor because light and medium armor factor in with your dexterity to give you a higher armor class, where heavy armor, you don't factor in dexterity. It's just a set amount for the armor.
Correct. And so, once again, the proficiencies for armor typically come from your class. And so this combination would actually work well with a class that doesn't typically have a... like an armor proficiency associated with it, like a wizard, or you've got warlocks and stuff that also, I think warlocks get light armor proficiency.
Right, yeah.
So the medium armor would boost that if they are not very proficient with dexterity, or like they don't have a very high dexterity score.
Yeah, it's also worth noting, especially if you're making a magic character, there are certain spells like mage armor that don't work unless you're not wearing armor.
Correct.
So don't accidentally invest a huge amount in getting medium armor if your spells are better than the armor that you could equip.
Right, and mage armor is, I believe, 13 plus your dexterity modifier?
Yes, yeah. So essentially you don't need light armor or medium armor if you have mage hand and a good dex.
Right.
So you just kind of have to play out those factors when you're going through how you're going to do stuff.
If it is like how it is in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, then medium armor should consistently be whatever the medium armor score is plus... your dex maxed out at 2. So
yeah, right, 2, and then in the book there's a way to get that up to +3, but we don't know if that's in this game.
Oh, probably not. It doesn't get... I'm sure maybe later, or even with maybe mods, it could have that, but yeah. But then we can... here's the male version, and the female version back. And then we have the dwarf, who I believe they have 2 subclasses? Yeah. So we've got the... base racial features of Dwarven Resilience, which has advantage on saving throws against poison, which poison is a status effect that you can be inflicted with, and you do not want that because it does damage every turn. And so in order to avoid that, you make a saving throw, and then you also have resistance against poison damage, which is great because that means all poison damage you take is cut in half.
Right.
Then we have Constitution +2.
More health, always good.
Right. And then we have the proficiencies with these 4 weapons, and then dark vision up to 12 meters. And then for the gold dwarf specifically, we have these sub-race traits of dwarven toughness, and that means you basically add your level to your max health, where your hit point maximum increases by 1 for every time you level, or every level that you have. And then we have the base racial speed of 7.5 meters, which is slower, but as a dwarf, you got to understand that.
Right. That comes with
slower.
The extra health, though.
Right.
Like, you're going to be able to take more hits inevitably.
Yeah, the resilience and the toughness, and then the extra health. Yeah.
Yep.
And so then we have a wisdom of +1, which comes with the gold dwarf. And then moving on, we have the shield dwarf, which they have the same base race features, and then we have the sub-race traits of the same speed as the gold dwarf, +2 strength instead of +1 wisdom, and then we have armor proficiencies that come with this one as well.
Which the fact that the shield dwarf has a +2 in 2 different traits is extremely good for classes that you need a lot of health and damage.
Right. Strength, by the way, being primarily a attack-based stat, is the reason that he was talking about damage.
Right, because if you're a fighter, a shield dwarf is extremely good for that purpose alone.
There are strength checks out in the world that you can use, so it's not exclusively that, but it's one of the primary purposes of it. But moving on. Oh, real quick, here's the male dwarf. Actually, I don't think we showed the male elf. So this is the male elf as well.
Yep.
But so that is the male dwarf. Moving on to half elf.
Yeah. This one is my personal favorite because I feel like they have the absolute most variety.
Right.
Like,
so,
you can do just about anything you want with a half-elf, and you're not as restricted as if you were a human.
Right. So the benefit of the half-elf race is that
it's
you
essentially
can choose.
half human, half elf.
Right. And so the humans have +1 in everything, but you only get 2 of those points, and you can assign them to wherever you want. So we have here that they've already automatically been assigned Dex and Wisdom, but we can take that out. The star here actually shows, because the default is a wizard, it has the star here to show that wizards benefit from having a high intelligence for their magic spells. And so it's suggesting that you increase your intelligence as much as possible.
Right.
Which it's reflected here as well.
Yeah, and the rules with dividing up these ability points is you can't put them both on the same ability, and they can't go into charisma because you already get a +2 in charisma.
Correct. And so you just have these 5 abilities to choose from, and just for the sake of it, I'll put 1 in Dex and 1 in Intelligence.
Yep.
Which would be good for a wizard, just for the mage armor boosting, or getting boosted by the dexterity, and then also intelligence for the spells.
Yeah. So essentially, whatever.
As with the elf, we do also get a cantrip to choose from.
Oh, right. So whichever half-elf subclass you take, you're essentially getting the primary thing from that normal elf style. So
Yeah.
for the high half-elf, we get the cantrip. For the wood elf, I believe we get the Mask of the Wild.
Yes.
And then for
Which
the
is,
drow...
proficiency in stealth.
Yeah.
And the boosted movement speed.
Yep. And then for the drow, we get the... We don't get the superior dark vision, but we do get the cantrip. So it honestly looks like the half-elf drow is the one that benefits the least. You might as well kind of just go with a regular drow. I guess you can still be a drow and get the charisma, which is nice.
Right. Which, if we compare these two, the drow has a +1 to charisma and a +2 to dex. And so the half-elf drow has +2 to charisma, and then you can do the +1 to dex if you want a charisma focus here.
Right.
But moving on, we have the halfling here, who, just to be sure. Okay, yeah, we have the halfling as the final race. They do have, it looks like, 2 sub-races.
Yep. Now, halflings are extremely unique in one aspect, and that's that they get lucky.
Right.
Which is extremely clutch when it comes up.
Yes, and so basically lucky means that anytime that you roll for, as the description says, an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, and you roll a 1, which is a critical failure,
You can
worst. Re-roll the die and just take an entirely new roll, which effectively makes the worst roll actually not so bad.
Right.
And normally lucky is something where like you can only use it once per day or something, but it seems like in this game they've tweaked it so that you can just use it as many times as it happens.
Yeah, which is it's super nice because basically if you break it down by just the numbers, there's a 5% chance that that's going to happen.
Right. And then you just have a 5% chance that you could just re-roll it and get a better roll.
Yep.
And every other race just has to deal with that as like the 1, which could even have negative consequences depending on how they deal with that in this game.
Yeah.
We have yet to roll a 1, I believe.
Right.
Other than maybe attack rolls. But they also get a base race trait of +2 to their ability score of Dex. And then for the Lightfoot halfling, we have naturally stealthy for proficiency in stealth, a slow base racial speed like the dwarves, and then a +1 to charisma. We also have the Strongheart halfling, who has the same base race features, and then instead they have resilience like the dwarves do, or the that particular dwarf does. I don't know if they both do. They have advantage on saving throws against poison, and then also resistance to the damage, same speed, and then a constitution +1 instead. And so I believe with that we have all the races. Here is the female form of the halfling, by the way. Actually, I don't think I showed the half-elf female forms. And these are all customizable, obviously.
Right.
this is just the typical one.
Yep.
Or like the default one that they give you.
Yeah. And for the sake of the video, do you just want to go back to elf since we're just sticking with wizard?
Sure.
Cool.
And so for appearance, this is the third tab now.
You can essentially do whatever you want with a character. There's
We
tons
still
of
have
options.
this option up here to change between. And then the voices, we have, I believe, 6 voices. It looks
Only
like
four.
only 4. Okay.
Yeah, 2 female and 2 male voices.
Right. So the odd numbers are masculine voices, which if you... We'll stop talking and let you guys hear it more clearly real fast.
Yeah.
Hells. Something just woke up down here.
A tidy slot, but no room.
The stone's less warm here.
Hells. Something just woke up down here.
A tidy slot, but no room. The stone's less worn here. Recent.
Hells. Something just woke up down here.
A tidy slot, but no room.
So those are the 4 voices that we've got.
Yep. And then the different head options are just minor tweaks in the facial, like not necessarily expression, but just how it's structured.
Right. And we've got 5 options for that.
Yep.
And then we've already shown a brief show of the skin color, but for those that have skipped to this part of the video, different races and even sub-races have different palettes that they could choose from. This isn't for all of them. So like if we go to the tiefling, for instance, and go back to appearance, you can see that there's a vastly different palette that we can choose between. So, you know, we've got like this dark red, or I guess pinkish red, and then like just like all kinds of different options here. And I'll just go back to elf for the default here. And then we can change the eye color, which isn't super noticeable from this angle.
You can see it pretty prominently in your portrait that shows up during like the turn base and stuff like that.
Right, and then also there are close-ups for cinematics and conversations and everything that are, where it is a lot more pronounced. Oh, actually, I just noticed this option. Look at that, all skin colors.
Oh,
that
okay.
opens up every palette.
You can literally do whatever you want with any character.
That's interesting.
That's really cool.
I'm glad that I spotted that because I did not realize that was there.
Yeah, neither did I.
You know what? I'm going to go with a green.
That is really cool, though. I'm really glad that they did that.
Yeah.
That adds so much more potential for just random cool stuff.
And so we also have eye color here, which we can make them have giant pupils with black eye color.
Right.
I'm actually going to go with red.
That's a demonic black.
Yeah, that's I'm not sure what that is.
I'm assuming tiefling.
Oh, it inverts the color of the eyes.
That's pretty cool.
So that it's black eyes with white pupils. I actually really like that.
I'm assuming that's a tiefling thing primarily.
Oh, I'm sure.
And then there's 25 different hairstyles. I don't think we need to necessarily click through all of them, but it's worth noting that there's a lot.
I'll do a quick click through just so people can see them real fast. I will give it an angle so you can see the back. Bop, 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 bop. I should probably stop saying pop.
Yeah. All right. And then obviously with all the other customization, there's a bunch of different hair colors and stuff too.
Right.
It's worth noting that the tattoo styles are face tattoos.
Yes.
So it doesn't get too crazy.
You can see that there's a little bit on the left side of, I'm not even sure. Oh, I can zoom in.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So the scroll wheel lets you zoom in. So I guess if you want, we can look at the eye color again real fast. And you can see that there's an inverted tone, or sort of at least. I'm not sure if it's entirely inverted or if the eyes are just larger.
Yeah.
But you can see that it does have a much darker outside, and then you can see the hue much better at a close-up.
Right. All right. Well, that seems to be all the stuff with appearance.
Well, hold on. Let's go through the tattoos.
Yeah,
it looks like we've got a few birds here for the first tattoo. Some
like
some tentacles and stuff like that over the eyes. We've got some
I have no idea what that's supposed to say.
yeah, well, you know, I'm not even sure if I can declare that it is a current language.
Right.
It might just be characters from the game. And we'll just kind of move through these real fast. Oh, I see that's on the neck. Okay. Keep having me go to the other side of the face. This is back to no tattoo.
Yep.
And then we have makeup. Before we continue, for these tattoos, you also have tattoo intensity, which is how, I guess...
How much it shows up.
Right. Then we have the colors here, and you can make that basically, there's not as many colors as the others, but you can make it whatever you want.
Right.
And the intensity also helps with things like, obviously that one was way too bright, but you can turn that down. Let's go ahead and switch off the tattoo so we can see the makeup better. So for makeup, we have the base without makeup, and then we have makeup 1.
With us having green, it might be a little bit hard to tell what some of the makeup is.
Oh, right. I'll actually, just for the sake of this, I'll do here's a neutral tone 1, just for easier sight on that. So we have no makeup here, then we do makeup 1.
It's also worth noting that neither one of us know anything about makeup. So
right.
We're
so
just going to click through and let you guys just take a look.
Yeah. 3, 4. I'm not going to keep counting.
There you go.
All right. And there's actually one more feature that is missing from the elves that we have to go to a different race for. So let's hop over to human.
Right.
And so this is optional for either of these two options here.
Yep.
And so you can see that facial hair is an option for here.
Yep.
Also, I think maybe hairstyles are different depending on the race, but yeah, that'll be something that you'll have to decide the race for. But in the end, beards are also an option. I'll do a quick run through of what we have here. And the beards also match your hair color, so
yeah,
that'll go along with that. All right.
There we go.
And then moving on to class finally. I don't believe, yeah. Oh, actually, there is one more. Sorry, I keep forgetting. Tiefling has their own appearance option. They have the horn style. And so Tieflings don't always have the same horns. Normally they're vastly different in how their characteristics show up. And so we see here that we have horns 1, 2, and I'll stop counting again. All right. And with that, I believe that's all of the unique racial feats. I'm going to check the Githyanki because I'm not 100% familiar with them. It looks like they are, they don't have any specific altering things. I figured maybe their ears. But that's probably changed with the head shape.
Yep.
Yeah, it is, actually. Yeah.
Cool.
Moving on to class finally. We have 6 classes to choose from, which that is not the total number of classes that 5th edition has, but we're not 100% sure if they're going to add more later or what that situation will be.
Right.
So starting with Wizard, this is going to be a longer portion of this video just because there's so much to discuss with these classes and like the futures of them and everything.
Yeah, and we don't have to completely break down like the cantrips and the spells and all the unique things. It's
Right,
primarily what they're used for.
Right. So a wizard in 5th edition is a spellcaster that is heavily on the spellcasting side and not so much on the physical side at all.
Right. They are the jack of all trades when it comes to magic. They can either be utility to do like field control and support and stuff, or they can be huge damage dealers. There's really not much when it comes to spells that wizards cannot do.
Right. So the basic class features that we have here, we get 8 hit points. I suppose it says 8 hit points maximum. Points per level. Okay, so I was just making sure that wasn't. In some versions of Dungeons and Dragons, you roll for your hit points. In most cases, you just add a set amount. And for this, it is. We have hit points 8, and then does it add 8 per level? I believe it does. Well, regardless, we have spell slots unlocked, which for the wizard we have 2 level 1 spell slots, which are restored at a long rest. So when you cast a spell that's not a cantrip, typically you have to spend a spell slot to do so. And so starting at level 1, you have 2 level 1 spell slots. But going on from there and leveling up, you increase your stock of spell slots, and you also get access to higher level ones.
Yep.
So we have proficiencies with saving throws, which every class has their own 2 saving throw proficiencies. And these proficiencies are in your abilities and not your skills, because whenever you make a saving throw, it'll be something like intelligence saving throw or wisdom saving throw. And so for these, you add your proficiency bonus to those saving throws that you roll. So for instance, if it was an intelligence saving throw, the 16 is going to be a +3, which we'll explain how that works later, but you have your +3, and then the proficiency starting at level 1 is +2. And so you would have your roll +3, +2 to meet whatever number they set as the goal. Also with this class, you start with dagger, dart, sling, quarterstaff, and light crossbow proficiency. And you have this action, which you can cast once per day, which replenishes all of your spell slots.
Yep.
But you have an arcane recovery charge, which do you get more of those as you level up, I believe?
I'm honestly not sure. I have barely played the wizard.
I believe you do, but not very often. I
Right.
think you get maybe like once every few levels or something.
Yeah.
But
While we're on the wizard, it's also worth noting that you see spells are 6 out of 6 and prepared spells are 4 out of 4. The distinction is like the total spells is what you know. It's what you have like on hand.
Right.
But you can only like have ready 4 per day. So you can basically swap out spells that you know compared to what you can use for the day anytime that you take a long rest.
Right, and I'm not 100% sure if that mechanic translates to this game.
It does.
The same. It does?
Yes.
Okay. And so we've got a long list of spells that we can choose from for our starting out spells that we know.
Right.
And then from that list of 6, we can choose 4 more that are prepared.
Right. And when it comes to spells, it's really just whatever your preference is for style, but you can essentially break down spells and cantrips into 2 different types. There's damage dealing and there's utility. Now, there's obviously huge differences between certain things, like a damage of a firebolt is going to use fire compared to frost ray, which is going to use ice. So there's different types of attacks and stuff, but stuff like minor illusion and stuff isn't really going to be based in combat. That's going to be more of a help you sneak around and a utility thing that you use outside of combat.
Right, so we've got, like sleep. Well, I guess sleep can be used in combat.
Mm-hmm.
Disguise self, that's another good one.
Yep.
It changes your appearance so that, I'm not sure what options it gives you, but basically you can disguise the fact that you are, an elf or something like that.
Right, or say there's like some kind of bounty on your head and you need to sneak through the town, you can make yourself look completely different to where people wouldn't recognize you.
Right, and so as you level up, there are more features of the wizard class that are unlocked. It is not just these base features, but that'll be something that you have to check out in the future.
Yep.
If you select this class. And then, also one thing that wizards have is like with this spell book that they keep, which is the 6 spells that they start out with, you can add to them for the scrolls that you find throughout the world.
Yeah.
And so you can choose from those spells in the future as well. And your list of prepared spells also increases as you level up.
Yep.
That way you don't have to just stick with the same 4.
Cool.
And then we'll move on. I guess we're going in reverse order of these classes.
Yeah.
With the Warlock, which is also a spellcasting class.
Yes, but instead of using intelligence, the Warlock focuses in charisma casting.
Right.
So that's where you kind of just have to pay attention. Just because you cast spells doesn't mean you're going to use intelligence. Warlocks are different than wizards in most aspects around like damage dealing. So warlocks are generally, you get very, very few spells. I mean, you can see that we only have 2 and 2, which is less than half of what the wizard had, but they're more potent and generally are more damage dealing kinds of things.
Right. Where the wizard is more, they just have like access to tons of spells. The warlock typically focuses its spells around, combat-based spells, but they also have access to things outside of that. If we look at the list that you can start with here, Charm Person, Command, like these are, a lot of them are combat focused, but there's a couple of them that are somewhat utility.
Right. It's also worth noting where when we were looking at the wizard, it said that we get those back at a long rest. Warlocks have fewer things, but you get them back at a short rest, which is much more often.
Right, that's described right here. You can take a short rest, I think, any time of day, and it passes about an hour, at least in 5th edition.
In game time.
Right, and that will allow you to possibly heal. I'm not sure if we haven't taken a short rest in this game yet, so
Correct.
we're not 100% sure what mechanics it adds, but it allows you to regain your spell slots that you've spent. And the Warlock doesn't have many, but because they can restore it at any time of the day, they can use those spell slots more sparingly.
Yeah.
And so one cantrip that's actually unique to the Warlock class is the Eldritch Blast, which is, it does a pretty good amount of damage at a 1d10, which is a 10-sided die that it rolls in the game for you.
Right. But it's arguably the best cantrip because Warlocks, when they level up, can enhance Eldritch Blast with abilities that they get.
Right. So that's something that we both know pretty well, is that later on Warlocks get something called invocations, which are just modifiers that you can choose between from a list that, for instance, there's one invocation that you can choose that lets you cast mage armor at will any time of the day without using a spell slot, and so you just automatically have that. And then there's another one that lets you cast detect magic, I believe, right?
Yes. Oh, there's tons of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe you get more every 2 levels.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
It might be less often than that. But regardless, the one that we have here is the Fiend, which...
They are primarily the damage dealer.
Right. And I believe if we switch to the Great Old One, will that change the spells that we can choose between?
Some of
yeah,
them,
there
yes.
was some spells that got changed here. We have Dissonant Whispers and Tasha's Hideous Laughter here, which are...
normally bard spells. So this is the closest you can get to a bard right now, is
Right.
this type of warlock.
And so you'll be seeing some discrepancies with the spell lists and everything with that. And then we have... Oh, it's just the
Yep,
Fiend.
it's just the 2.
Okay. Okay, yeah. It looks like Burning Hands, I think, is exclusive to the Fiend. And
Yes,
then
it is.
I think also Command?
Mhm.
No. Or here, let me see. Yes, okay, so Burning Hands and Command, I believe, are unique to the Fiend. But there's also later some spells that are unique to the Fiend as well. I believe Fireball is
Mhm.
one that is unique to the Fiend. Or at least it's automatically something that you know and can, assign as one of your 2 spells. Or later on, a longer spell list anyway.
Right.
And so as you level up, you can also have your spell slots be improved. So these spell slots are always at the highest level, is what it says. What that means is, I believe at level 3 or 4, you get access to level 2 spells.
Right.
And when that happens, all of your spell slots that you have get changed into level 2 or 3 spells.
Right,
Or
so
level 2 spells.
You're never really casting weaker spells.
Yeah, and as those spell slots keep increasing to the next level, all your spells increase in damage and effectiveness. And so that's another thing that makes the Warlock class great at like combat is that spells like, if we see here, Hellish Rebuke, you cast it at level 1 for 2d10 fire damage, but if you cast it at level 2,
It'd be 3d10.
right, it adds extra damage, or I presume 3d10 anyway. And we'll move on from the Warlock to the Rogue. So the Rogue does not have any subclasses, although they do in 5e.
Right.
So
Yeah,
5th
so we
edition
might get
Dungeons and
those
Dragons.
later.
Right.
It's also worth noting that the Rogue is kind of like the Warlock for Dex, where you normally just kind of do a ton of damage with the little that you have.
Right.
So the primary focus of rogues is sneak attack. So you basically, if you have allies around and stuff, you can just do massive damage to one single target.
Right. So the prerequisite for a sneak attack is that you have to have either advantage on your attack, which that can happen from a variety of different things. For melee, if they've fallen prone on the ground, or if they're in some other sort of situation like that, then you can have advantage on that attack, which would give you the sneak attack ability. Otherwise, if another enemy of the target, so that can either be an ally of yours, or if this is like a 3-sided battle where there's where everybody's fighting 2 enemy parties, and like you're all just trying to fight for the same target, and as long as it is an enemy to your enemy, then and they're within 1.5 meters, then you can use your sneak attack, and you can do that. Is that for any attack? I don't believe it is an action, but I don't believe it is like limited to like once per turn or anything like that, if you have access to multiple actions.
Right. Which most rogues do not.
Oh, okay. I've not played a rogue very much, so this is somewhat new to me. But we have the dexterity and intelligence bonuses. They start with light armor, and then this list of weapons as their proficiencies. And so your sneak attack... Oh, actually, I've forgotten that you have advantage when you're hidden. So, like, when you are hidden and then you attack from a spot where they can't see you, you do have advantage.
Which is great for starting fights.
Right. So stealth is also very nice and necessary for a rogue if they're going in the route of focusing on sneak attacks.
Cool.
And, there are more traits, as always, later that the rogue unlocks, but that's something that they don't show here. Anyway, moving on to Ranger. We have a lot of options with this one.
Yeah, unlike most people's assumption, Rangers are actually spellcasters in Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. They're kind of like a split between melee combat and melee and, I guess, ranged combat and spellcasting.
Yep.
And so we have here the favored enemy, which each of these actually gives us a little bit of a bonus, as well as like a certain type of creature that they are good at fighting.
Right, and
so,
there's a bunch of these, so we can probably just kind of hover over them for a second to go through all of them.
Right, there are some traits that I'd like to describe. Like, for instance, if we look at Bounty Hunter, we learned the Thieves' Cant passive, which Thieves' Cant is a sort of sign language that typically like rogues and thieves and bandits and stuff might learn, that lets them communicate without talking. I'm not sure how that's used here, but we might be able to like pick up on a conversation or something if we have that. But yeah, so we have that, and then we have here we gain the proficiency and can cast protection from good and evil. That saying, you can cast it doesn't necessarily mean that like it's automatically in your spell list for available spells, because I'm not sure how that works for Rangers.
Right. It would basically add it as like generally with stuff like that, it's a once per short or long rest thing.
Okay. Mage Breaker, you gain the True Strike cantrip, and you use Wisdom for that spell. Ranger Knight, I guess I haven't been picking these, but Ranger Knight, you gain proficiency with History and Heavy Armor. And then Sanctified Stalker, we have proficiency with Religion and the Sacred Flame cantrip. And then moving on, we also have Natural Explorer, which is just like an extra feature for this class.
Yep.
We have Beast Tamer, which lets you cast Find Familiar, which we tried that out on one character. It casts, and there's like 5 creatures that you start out being able to summon, which each have their own abilities and traits.
Yeah, and we're assuming that it gets better as you level up, because most of the things that we summoned were very like low level and weren't really around long enough to benefit from what they were doing.
Right, and Find Familiar it tends to be sort of in that category, but one thing that makes Find Familiar interesting in 5th edition is that as you level up, you can summon stronger things.
Right, which is what we're assuming you can do in this game.
Rather, not Find Familiar, but Beast Tamer specifically as a feature.
Yes.
But then moving on, we also have Urban Tracker, which gives you proficiency with the Disguise Kit and Thieves Tools, which those are specifically tools that you can use. I mean, they're very self-explanatory. In the end, Thieves Tools let you pick locks.
Yep.
Then these 3 give you resistance to the specific damage types, so cold, fire, and poison respectively. And then for the base class features, you see that we have strength and dexterity as the saving throw proficiencies. We have light and medium armor as a base, and of course the Ranger Knight boosts that to heavy armor.
Yep.
And then we have shield proficiency, which we haven't actually brought that up. Shields are an option to use in your offhand that boost your armor by 2, which I guess as we're talking now, we don't really have like a comparison for how that helps, but it is a decently significant boost.
Yes. It's basically a 10% less chance to get hit if you're talking about a dice roll.
Right, before any modifiers or anything like that.
Yep.
And then we have the simple weapon proficiency, which gives you proficiency with every simple weapon, which there's a list that you can look up of that if you're, if you want to. I'm not going to list them all here. There's a lot of them. And then it's the same with the martial weapon proficiency.
Yeah.
Martial weapons typically do more damage, but you don't very often find their proficiencies automatically given.
Right, which is
Except
what's very nice about Rangers.
Right. Rangers have that, and then certain other classes.
I believe fighters do as well.
Fighters, and I believe paladins.
Right, but they're not in this game.
Yes, paladins are not. So moving on from the ranger class, we have the fighter.
Probably the most basic of all of them, but sometimes that's a good thing.
Right.
Because fighters are going to be your universal, like, tanks and heavy hitters.
Yes. They start out with heavy armor proficiency and shield proficiency, and all weapons, all armor, and strength and constitution saving throws.
And they can heal themselves.
Right. And they get 12 hit points per level?
Which is the most.
Or is this just the starting hit points?
That's the starting hit points.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I believe that's actually modified by our skills or abilities.
That
rather.
is before.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, anyway. Oh, your class does determine how many hit points you get per level. Your constitution just modifies that.
Yes.
So having a high constitution would help something like a wizard or a warlock who has relatively low starting hit points get boosted up to like if this constitution was average, which is 10, then they would only have 8 starting out.
Right.
And then they would only get not very much per level.
Yeah.
But regardless.
And then the very last thing for the fighter is the second wind, which is the action at the bottom. You
Right.
basically...
A bonus action, actually.
Yeah, which you can basically just heal yourself, which is nice.
Yeah, and once per day you
Yeah.
can use that. And so you'd have to take a long rest in order to fix that.
Yep. And then finally the cleric. Basically who everybody knows is a healer.
Right. And life domain is like more specific even into that. So they do have 3 subclasses for the cleric. We have the life domain. Well, we'll get into that once we get further down the list. But we have the deity, which for now we don't see how relevant it is.
Right.
There might be dialogue options that come up in the future, which like are specific to a certain deity.
Yeah.
But we'll click through those real fast.
There are a lot of them.
And I think Tur was the one that I started on, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then we have the cantrips. The cleric is a spellcasting class.
Right, which all 3 of the different domains or subclasses each have their own cantrips and spells that are kind of mixed and matched depending on what you are.
Right. So I'll just go ahead and scroll over those real fast to see what kinds those are. Then we have the prepared spells here. They often have support abilities, such as Shield of Faith here, which boosts your armor class in the same amount that a shield would.
Right.
To anybody, including yourself or others. And as always, the prepared spell list starts out at 3 and then it'll increase later. You start out with 2 level 1 spell slots that restore at long rests, just like the wizard. And then you have up to medium for the base class features, and shield proficiency as well for armor, I mean. And then simple weapon proficiency, but not martial weapon proficiency. Because they are not typically a melee class. They are more of a support class.
Yep.
Well, rather I should say they do use melee, but more often they're supposed to be in support. The life subclass focuses on the ability to heal, but also gives a heavy armor proficiency, which is nice. And then also we have the Disciple of Life here, which, if you read the description, boosts the amount of healing that you do when you cast a healing spell to 2 plus the spell's level. So it is typically like Cure Wounds or Healing Word here. Those are the most common spells that heal, and those are level 1, so that would heal a bonus of 3 to whatever you roll for those spells.
Yep.
Then
and
we
then
have
each subclass gets domain spells as well, which for
these
these
are
two.
automatically always known. So alongside these 3 spells, these 2 are available. And so we have Bless here and Cure Wounds.
Yep.
And so if we switch over to the light domain, you can see that instead of heavy armor proficiency and the other traits that we have Warding Flare, which whenever it looks like you can cast that and prepare it so that whenever somebody attacks, you can impose disadvantage on your attacker as a reaction. So how this game works is there's an action, a bonus action, and a reaction once per round. And so when you use your action or bonus action on your turn, you then have a reaction when it's not your turn, when somebody else does something like, if they move past you, you can get an opportunity attack, or there's certain spells that use your reaction, like for instance this Warding Flare.
Yep.
And then they have the domain spells here, which looks like they've got quite a lot here actually.
Yeah.
Do they actually have Cure Wounds and Bless as well? I didn't think they did. That might be
No, I probably should be. I think the benefit of the Life Cleric is the fact that you get bonuses to those.
well, I
More
think
so than just having them.
I think it's rather strange that it has these 2 separated here at the
I
top and
gotcha.
bottom. We'll have to test that later. We haven't built a life cleric or a light cleric yet to test that, but we get Burning Hands and Fairy Fire as our class spells, and then also light as a class spell. I'm not sure if these are included. We'll have to test that. Moving on though. Yeah, those should be the same.
And
We
then
have the
last
Trickery domain.
which this is the one that we probably know the least amount about.
Right. So they do not get any specific subclass features, but they do get Charm Person and Disguise Self as spells, and then they have the Blessing of the Trickster as an action. And so
Helps you
that
just
lets
be more
you
sneaky.
just, yeah. And so if you've got like one other person with you that isn't typically good at stealth, you can help that person out.
Yep.
Or if there's one person that's infiltrating and you just need to make sure that they're good, you can do that as well. All right, and I believe that is the last class.
Yeah.
So we'll be moving on to skills now.
And I think we were going to just set up a wizard, or just like an example of what we would build when it comes to like a good combination of stuff with the class and stats and stuff.
Right, so we'll go with the wizard.
Yep. And then
And
go ahead and change us back to the elf.
sure.
Cool. Skills are basically your overworld stuff. Every single class or race or whatever has different things for them, but for example, the elf and the wizard, we have the selection at the top of Arcana, History, Insight, Investigation, Medicine, and Religion.
Right.
And whenever you go over it, you can tell it says Intelligence, so you can actually see before you pick what stat it is increased by.
Yeah, so investigation, it shows intelligence skill, wisdom skill, intelligence skill. So I can't very well like go over and highlight it, but if you look in the description box between the word history and the 20-sided die, you see that it says intelligence skill.
Yeah.
And then we have all of these. I'll actually go over each of them just so that you can kind of see briefly what they are for future reference.
Cool. And then we could just pick something for an example, like
right.
Arcana.
So for a wizard, Arcana is typically like magic related stuff. History is self-explanatory. Insight, actually all of these have descriptions, which is great. So if you need to look into more what they mean, just go ahead and pause the video whenever I had gone over them. But Arcana is good for wizard. Investigation is just an overall good thing to have. Insight and religion are also great. Medicine isn't so much a wizard thing to know. History would be good if we wanted that, but we only have 2 to pick from, so we'll just pick those 2 for now.
Right.
And
I think finally abilities.
Right. The list that you can pick from is typically decided by your class. So a different class would have a different list to pick from. Also, your origin, don't forget, also determines a couple of the proficiencies that you start with. So you can actually get proficiencies from outside your class list with your origin.
All right, so this is probably, this is arguably the most important thing, because this is what's going to determine, like, your damage output, how you interact with the world, how well you can basically succeed in events.
Right, so with a wizard, we see that intelligence has this star, which is very important. This is somewhat useful to have here.
Right. And
these little arrows show you the skills that are included with these ability modifiers.
Yeah, and I would go ahead and bottom out all of those just so we can kind of give an example of how to use the point system.
Right, so this is called a point buy system, and the minimum stats that you can have in a point buy system typically for 5e is 8.
Right.
And so that's included, or that is the value when you take every point out and you're just left with what bonuses you have from your race or from other factors that may have increased your stats.
Right,
and
which is why we have a 10 in Dex and a 9 in Intelligence.
Because we had the +2 and +1 from our
from being an elf.
Yes.
Yep. Now, if we were putting together this, we would most likely want to kind of lean into our strengths, because you have a party of 4 in this game.
Right.
So you don't necessarily need to be great at everything, although you can. There's definitely a benefit to having like medium stats in most things.
Right.
But if we were building a wizard, for example, we would probably, because we know that every 2 points is where you get a bonus. So we would probably focus on intelligence first, because that's our most important.
So the max you can have is typically, I believe, 15.
Right.
But that does not include the bonuses that you get. So I'm actually going to show this real fast, starting out with wisdom, which at 8 you can see is a -1 because it is 2 less than 10. 10 being the average, and then every 2 points below or above is a modifier of 1. So -1 for 8. Then if we bring it up to 10, it goes to 0, and then +1, +2, and then 15 is the max that you can enhance a base stat. And so you see that it's at +2, and that these last points, you can see that they cost 2 ability points to increase from 14 and 15.
Yeah.
And so whenever you're buying points, it costs extra for increasing it the higher it goes. So you'll just have to watch that as you're buying points. But I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 10 for now. And then, like we said before, we're going to increase this. But since our race boosted it by 1, we're actually able to boost that to 16 since the base value is 15, and then we get the +1 from our race.
Right, which we're most likely going to be able to want to do that with intelligence and dex.
Right. And since wizards are particularly spongy anyway with low health count, it's good to go ahead and give that a little bit of a boost, a little bit of a padding. And then for mage armor, it's good to boost dexterity up as well.
Right, which we get.
And so we could technically put that at 17, but having it at 17 doesn't really actually provide us much of a bonus.
Right.
And so we'll leave that at 16 for now.
Yep.
Since it takes 2 to be able to get up to the next point.
Right, and then you can either bottom out stuff like strength and charisma if you don't think you're going to need it, or if you just want to play it safe, you can basically balance them out at 10, so it's a neutral stat for you.
Right, and that way you don't really have any sort of negative consequences to something like that.
Right. Now, if you have a rogue stat point like this one, what my recommendation would be is if there's a stat in the future that you think you may want to put a point in, go ahead and put that extra point there, just because it doesn't really help to put +1 in a random stat, but if you think you're going to increase it later, you could potentially make it a +2.
Right.
Which I don't know for a wizard what would necessarily be good. Maybe charisma or wisdom, just to help with checks and like conversation and stuff.
Right, we can do the wisdom. Just throw a point in there. And so down here we have the proficiency bonus, which you can see from the description. It adds to the following dice rolls and that you're proficient in. So we talked about proficiency throughout this video, but if you're skipping to this, your proficiency with certain weapons and certain skills allows you to add this bonus right here. I can't highlight it without that popping up. The +2 to all of those checks, right, universally every time. And so that's attack rolls, that's skill checks, anything that uses the ability that you are proficient with.
Yeah.
And so then, or not ability, but rather the skill that you are proficient with. This bonus does increase as you level up, so it won't always be a +2.
Right.
And so that benefit does get better over time.
Yeah, it starts at a +2, and then by the time you hit max level in regular Dungeons and Dragons, it maxes out at a +5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the leveling looks like in this game.
Yeah.
In Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, it's very exponential. The requirements are very exponential to keep leveling up.
Right. But I believe that's everything with creating a character.
Oh, there is one more thing. There is a button down here if any of this confused you and you're not sure what stats to pick. There's a recommended button.
So, yeah.
That'll balance things out. You can see that they did go with a higher intelligence and dexterity, and they boosted their charisma as well.
Constitution.
Their constitution as well. They bottomed out their strength because that's not very often very useful for a magic class character, or specifically one that has no physical traits. And they just had a little bit in charisma and wisdom as well. And so that's pretty similar to what we did,
yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
We just focused a little bit more in dex because we know that means less of a chance to get hit.
Right, which is detrimental to a wizard, yeah. All right, and I believe that is everything with creating a character.
Yeah.
Oh, and then actually, there is one more customization thing that comes up after this.
Right.
We'll go ahead and show you. So after you click to finish that character, you have your... Now, this hasn't come up in our campaign yet.
Right.
It basically asks, who do you dream of and who attracts you? So most likely this is like your fated soulmate or something like that.
Right.
Which I'm not sure if they're going to force that on you, but you can see that you have...
It's basically all of the customization options without the actual like skills and combat and stuff. It's literally just looks.
Right. And you have like all the same appearance options here.
Yep.
And then once you finish that, you can start the game.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for watching. Hope we were able to help you, get what character you want for the game. Mm-hmm. If you liked what you see or you want to see more of our content, we are Bro Gamer Moves. You can find us actually doing a Let's Play of this game right now.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, so feel free to go to our channel, see what you like, and thanks everybody for watching.
Yep. Have a great day.